wanted to address a stereotype about ball pythons. I'm still hearing in a lot of places, such as some of the Facebook groups, that ball pythons are naturally sedentary, and that one of the things that I heard that really struck me, and I wanted to do a video about this, is that I saw in one of my groups somebody had posted something that said a happy ball python is a hiding ball python. And I hear that sentiment repeated a lot still in many of the Facebook groups and other types of forums. And I have 3 of them, and none of them really fit that description. I've also seen other videos of people with ball pythons that don't fit that description too. So I really think that it's a misinterpretation of the fact that ball pythons are generally nocturnal. So if you're expecting them to move during the day, it's very likely that they'll be sleeping at that time. So of course, you wouldn't be moving when you're sleeping either. But that doesn't mean that you're naturally sedentary. I thought about this quite a bit, and I thought about the fact that that is probably where people in the hobby misinterpreted the whole thing, and that ball pythons gained the reputation of always being in a ball, always being in their hides, not wanting to interact, not wanting to explore. And I find that nothing could really be further from the truth. As you can see here, this is Velvet. She was born in 2012, June 2012. So she's around 6.5 years old. And she's a full-grown female. And she pretty much has not stopped moving the entire time that I've been on video. She's constantly looking around to see what she can explore. She really likes to climb, and that's another misconception. A lot of people think of ball pythons as completely ground-dwelling snakes. But in fact, there is some research recently that found that ball pythons had birds in their stomach. So therefore, that suggests that they must climb at least part of the time when there are places available to climb, when there are trees around and branches and other kinds of things. So that, that's very important information for people to look at when they're evaluating what the snake's behavior is. And I also know that ball pythons are very adaptable. They pretty much will adapt to your lifestyle. So, if you put them in a tub or other kind of enclosure, and pretty much leave them there, except for when you absolutely have to take them out, then I think they adapt to what you do with them or don't do with them. So, when they realize that they're probably not going to be coming out, I think that they become more used to that, and they adapt directly to what your routine is. There may be some snakes that are not quite as adaptable. I think this is part of what makes ball python such a good pet, but the downside of it is that if you overfeed them, they get fat. They don't always refuse food, although they do have hunger strikes, and they have periods where they're finicky and they might not want to eat. But if you have a snake that is a good eater, they will feed until they get obese. And I think part of that is that adaptability. And So I think that there are a lot of misconceptions still about ball pythons that need to be dispelled. And I would really love it if other people would make videos about this topic as well. If you have experience with your snakes that is similar to what I'm saying, please share it, because I think there are a lot of people that are still stuck in old stereotypes about them, when in fact there's a whole lot more that we're beginning to find out about these animals, and that they're a lot more interesting than we used to think. There are also a lot of videos recently that have come out about enrichment of snakes, and I think that that's very important, especially in a situation where you keep your snake in a rack. There may not be a lot for them to do in the cage, so I think it's even more important in that kind of a housing situation to take your snake out regularly, give it something for it to, a different change of scenery, something for it to do and something for them to see. Let them stretch their muscles, let them kind of exercise their brain and their thinking capacity, and you'll be surprised what your snake will do when given the chance. All of my snakes are very inquisitive. I've never had a snake that stays in a ball or stays in its hide all the time. In fact, I regularly offer my snakes hides when I first get them, and what I find is that 9 times out of 10 they just push it aside. They don't want it. They're not interested in being in there, because I pretty much start interacting with them from day one. I know that there are people who, pretty much when they get a new snake, they pretty much let it sit for the first week or so. I don't do that, and I've found that works for me, that I start acclimating the snake to who I am and my handling pretty much every day from the time that I get it. And I find that they are much more willing to explore and be active, and it seems to me that their brain is more stimulated that way, because more is being asked of them. There's more stimuli coming in for them to respond to. And I think that a snake that is never taken out, pretty much only taken out when the cage is cleaned or something like that, they learn to adapt accordingly, and so they may become sedentary as a response to the way the owner is taking care of them. But I found that my ball pythons are always very interactive. They like to see what's going on. They'll periscope up. I'll put them on my bed and let them come out for a little while, and they'll periscope up and look across the room to see see what their surroundings are. And oftentimes they'll see surfaces across the room, like a table or a chair or bookcase or something like that, and they'll see that and they'll be bound and determined to get over there and climb on it. And they seem to really enjoy climbing. And I find also that although they do enjoy climbing, they like to climb somewhat laterally, rather than straight up. I think, maybe a snake that's fully arboreal might want to climb straight up, but ball pythons, it seems to me that they like ledges. They like to go from one ledge to another, and one surface to another. And if one is somewhat higher, they will climb up, but they seem to like to climb across, from what I've observed. And I think a lot of people may not ever see that in their snake because they never give it the opportunity to exhibit that kind of behavior. But, when they're given the opportunity, I think that they naturally like to climb, they like to explore. And I noticed that with Velvet, when I have her, even when she's in her cage, she's almost never coiled in a tight ball. Occasionally she'll be somewhat in a circular shape when she's sleeping, but oftentimes I find her asleep and she is sort of, only folded in half, where, she's like in a U shape. But very rarely does she do anything but pretty much stretch out. My male Caduceus, he'll sometimes sleep in a circle, but he still, you just don't see him really ball up in the classic sense that ball pythons are known for. And when I take him out, he also is pretty much on the move. He's looking around. He's looking at me. He's looking at his surroundings. And then my newest one, Tiger Lily, she's extremely inquisitive. And I found the other day that she came, and I put her over there on the bed, maybe a few feet away from me, to see what she'd do, thinking that maybe she would want to go off the bed or to another surface or something like that. And what she actually did was turn around, and she came right up on my lap, and she was looking up at me, almost like a cat or a dog does. You wouldn't expect that from a snake, but some of them do that. And I think we're just beginning to scratch the surface of what these snakes are capable of, and what their mental capacity is, and their ability to think and problem solve and to plan. And I find it very interesting that, for instance, when Velvet gets it in her head that she wants to go and reach over to my chair, or reach over to this art desk on either side of my bed, she sort of makes that a hard target, and I can turn her around the other way, and she'll turn right around and try to go toward that goal, because she wants to see what's up there. It's very clear that she's thinking and that she's planning, that that's what she wants to do. And I think a snake that was just, purely instinct, and unable to learn, and just extremely limited, probably wouldn't be able to do that. They wouldn't have a plan mapped out in their head, and then be insistent on following that. So that shows some planning on her part, that she has seen an area that she wants to explore, and so she she has a plan in her mind that she wants to get from here to over there. And so I think that it would be very interesting to hear from other people some of these experiences that they've had with their ball pythons, some of these myth-busting kinds of things that you would only know unless you actually saw the snake do these things. I I know that, another thing that Velvet does is that there are times when she will actually come up the side of her cage when I come into the room. And, some people might say, oh, well, she's probably hungry, she's looking for food. But I've actually tested this out, and I've brought a rat to her, either a frozen thawed or a live rat, and she will actually ignore it, and she'll actually, after a while, she'll try to flee from it if she's not hungry. So she's basically telling me, no, that's not what I want. And what I find out is that she wants to come out. And that's her way of telling me that she wants to come out, is that she goes up to the very top, to the lid, and sticks her head up. And this is something that I've seen her do quite a bit. And so, I can definitely tell that it's not that, that she's just waiting for food, or that she's hungry and, sitting in that position where she's, where she's ready for a meal. The other thing that I've noticed about her is that, oftentimes when I'm handling her, she will actually, she will actually come up and look at me and sort of almost like, she'll sort of lick me with her tongue, I guess, coming up to I don't know, I guess the best way I can describe it is to come up, and she sort of comes up and says hi to me. That seems to be her way of greeting me. And she does this fairly often. And I know that, as many years as I've had her, she knows my smell. She is able to recognize me. So I think that that is her form of a greeting, when she wants to recognize me, and the same way that another animal, a dog or a cat, comes up and looks at you, or comes up and licks you, or comes up and puts their paw on you. I think that's her way of greeting me. But yeah, I'd like to hear some other people and their stories about their ball pythons, and some of these things that that bust some of the myths, some of the old and maybe more outdated ideas about them. Because I think that this is something, these kinds of myths continue to persist. And, you hear people call ball pythons pet rocks. And, it's a shame, because, usually when you talk to those people and you ask them, do you take your snake out regularly, and, what is your routine with them? Usually they'll tell you that they rarely handle them, and a lot of times it's because of the belief that they'll be stressed out if you handle them. And I think that a lot of people still look at ball pythons as very fragile, and in fact they're not, because imagine that, them living in Africa in the wild. There are a lot of predators in Africa, and the climate is pretty hot. It's one of those environments where I'm sure that it's plenty stressful for a wild snake. Then there are people that come and try to steal their eggs for these farms. They have to worry about, possibly somebody, some animal coming and eating their eggs or eating them. even in terms of the African soft-furred rats that they naturally eat in the wild, they have to worry about these rodents biting them and possibly damaging them. And I have never actually had an African soft-furred rat, but everybody that I've spoken with said they can be pretty vicious, and they don't have the same temperament as one of our regular rats. And so, I can imagine that, although it's not the same challenges that they have in captivity, that probably a snake living in the wild has a fair amount of stress, and they manage to survive. And in captivity, we take a lot of that stress away from them because they don't have to worry about predators. They don't have to worry about hunting for their own food. We provide all that to them. And what I've noticed is that just like with humans and with other animals, you have to sort of desensitize them from things when they start out being afraid, when they don't know you, when they're young. And I know that some ball python babies can be nippy. Luckily, I've never had that with my snakes, but I think that initially, when snakes are young, they're afraid of humans because here's this big giant whatever, they don't know what we are at first, coming toward them, and they really don't know if we're going to eat them or what we're going to do. But once we gain their trust and they learn that we're not out to hurt them, then that stress goes away. It's temporary, and they're not going to die because initially they're afraid of being handled or afraid of being touched. And I think that in time they actually come to enjoy it. It's more than just tolerating us. I think that they really they really start to enjoy the interaction, and they like being out of their cage and being able to have, more space to move around. So I think that's another misconception that is still very rampant in some of the reptile groups, where people view ball pythons as so fragile that the slightest amount of stress is gonna, the snake's gonna die. And that's really, frankly, silly, because these are very resilient animals. I think that to believe that about them is really selling them short. It's really underestimating them and their amazing ability to adapt. And the fact that they are adaptable is what makes them so able to overcome a lot of things that that might initially bother them. And I think that the fact that they are so adaptable also indicates that they learn very well, that they're able to learn from new experiences. They're able to process what's going on in their environment, process changes. I know that ball pythons initially, they may have an adjustment period when you move them up into larger cages and that kind of thing. But they do get used to it, and I think they get used to a lot of things, and they're able to have a different outlook on their experiences. And just like us, I know that in a lot of Brian Barczyk's videos, there are people that come to the reptarium in order to overcome their fears. snakes or of other animals that he has there. And if they never challenged themselves and they never gave themselves the opportunity to face their fears and overcome their fears, then that stress would always be present. And I think it's the same with snakes, that they too can desensitize themselves to their fears. When they start out and they don't know you, of course they're going to be a little afraid, they're going to be a little hesitant about who you are and what your intentions are. But as they become more familiar with you and they see you every day and they see that nothing bad happens, then then they lose that fear and they no longer have that stress. And I think that this is sort of still somewhat of a new way of thinking about them. But I see that there are a few other people doing videos like this on this kind of a topic. And I think that probably by not exposing them to these kinds of experiences, we're actually prolonging stress that they might have. Because when a snake it's really just like a dog. Research has found that when you pen a dog up and you don't expose it to other human beings, and let's say the dog is only used to one owner, has never been exposed to children, kept away from visitors, then it really doesn't know how to behave socially with other people. And so that kind of a dog is more likely to be defensive and bite than a dog that's introduced to a number of people and is used to interacting with people of different ages and different genders and sizes and that kind of a thing. And I think it's the same way with snakes, that the very thing that people fear, which is that a snake will bite, that risk is lessened the more you handle it and the more you expose it to human beings and give it the opportunity to become unafraid of human beings. And I think the best thing that we can possibly do for our snakes is to acclimate them as much as possible to human interaction. So I just wanted to do this topic because I think it's so important, as we still have a lot of misconceptions out there. And ball pythons are such wonderful animals, and I think they're so misunderstood, even by people within the hobby. So if you would, please make videos about this type of topic when you all do your videos. Show your ball pythons and what they're capable of, beyond just what they look like or how they're breeding, and how they're growing, that kind of thing. Talk about their personalities. Talk about their abilities. Talk about how they defy some of the stereotypes about them, and how they don't stay in the ball, and how they like to